employees in the interim, while we sue for some kind of relief. This is something I've never seen in my over 40 years in the sector.
Yeah, you're not alone on that front. Dennis Darby, thank you for jumping on and making some time on this important day. I appreciate it.
Okay, take care.
Thank you. I'm going to go now to Lana Payne. She is Unifor's national president. She's also a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations. Lana Payne, thank you for making some time for us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So what are you thinking now, knowing that this is happening, that it is as big as we thought, and that it's going to happen as soon as Tuesday? What are your first concerns?
Oh, Rosemary, where do I start? It's so huge right now. The impact on Canadian workers. You know, the Prime Minister has basically declared economic war on our country with these actions. Economic war on Canadian workers and even on some of his own workers in the United States. And we have to fight back. We do not have a choice as a country. We're going to have to retaliate, yes, with tariffs of our own, and that will be painful, but there is not a choice. He only will recognize strength, and that is the only hand that we have to play right now. But we have leverage, a lot of it, and we're going to have to be bold enough to use that leverage.
I don't know if you heard David Cochrane reporting earlier that part of what has been communicated to the Prime Minister's office is that if Canada does go ahead with counter tariffs, the United States would consider increasing the 25% tariff higher. Does that give you pause, that a counter tariff could lead to further escalation and further pain? What are you thinking when you hear that?
Well, of course, the threats will keep coming over and over and over again. We've seen that for many, many weeks now, that the threats increase. Where does it end? We have to take a stand. I believe today, for us as Canadians, everything has changed forever right now. Everything we knew is different. We are going to have to be more creative than we've ever been in the last 40 or 50 years in terms of how we use and lever economic policy in our country. But also we need Canadians to come together in a large way for the fight that we are going to have ahead.
So what does that look like, Lana Payne? You know, we've heard people talk about interprovincial trade barriers, which sure would do something. Economic patriotism, sort of getting people to buy only from Canada, telling people not to vacation in the United States. Like what concretely does that look like?
I'm sure they're all good things. On international trade barriers, I'm going to be the person that says, look, we're in a big fight. Let's not get sidetracked by rabbits here. These are problems for sure. But we got bigger ones that we have to deal with right now. And we have leverage. We have critical minerals in this country. Let's wrap our arms around them. Let's make sure we use this in this fight ahead. Make sure that they can't be owned by foreign companies, make sure they can't be owned by American companies. There are lots of proposals that we can put on the table here that are non-tariff related that can put Canada in a very, very good place in terms of how we fight back without causing pain in our own country. So the response has to be yes, tariffs, yes, a sign of strength. The strongest and hardest push that we can put there. We have to look at and consider every non-tariff measure that we can, and we better make sure that we are protecting workers in the days, weeks, and months ahead, because that has to be a priority. And that means also not just fixing and tinkering around the edges with employment insurance. It means looking at how we can make sure that workers continue to work through this crisis. We are about to face, potentially a recession across North America as a result of the president's actions, and Canada's got to stand strong. We also have to look at what we have to do in the long term here, medium and long term, to build a more resilient Canadian economy, because obviously we do not have an ally in the United States anymore.
What were you told, or what have you been hearing from the Prime Minister and the government, given you're on that council, about supports for workers and sectors? We know that that's a piece that they were working on. Do you have a sense of how quickly that could roll out, how quickly it would be needed?
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at tariffs being implemented on Tuesday, we have some industries, they are so interconnected, as you heard from your last guest, that things could grind to a halt pretty quickly if we're in a place where parts cannot be produced because of these tariffs, whether it's the auto industry or the aerospace industry. So we could be feeling pain very quickly.
Yeah.
I want to also remind you,
I
we
thought
have
it
a
was
forest
supposed to
sector in
start
this
today,
country
Mm-hmm.
that is
February
already
1st.
under tariffs.
15% coming up this year. You put another 25% on top of that, it would be just completely devastating to forestry workplaces and workers all across this country. So that industry is going to need a different kind of support
Right, right.
going forward.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lena Payne. I'll end on this. What would you say to workers, some of your members or other people who are hearing this news today and wondering, frankly, in some industries, whether they'll be out of a job by the end of next week?
I would say that they have a strong union that's going to fight for them every step of the way. That we are in a place and people are listening to what we are saying right now,
Right.
but also that we're going to have to fight for the kinds of things that we're going to need from all levels of government.
Okay, Lena Payne,
Kumain ka
thank
na
you
rito.
for jumping on. Again,
May
really
hintayin nyo yung
difficult
kanin.
news, but appreciate
Oops,
getting
sorry.
your perspective on this day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring in again the CBC News chief correspondent and host of The National, Adrienne Arsenault. I've been getting this conversation happening on some emails to me, Adrienne.
Yep.
People saying, okay, well, this is our greatest ally and trading partner. Surely there are other places where we can either create alliances and allyship or places where we can look to for further trading relationships.
Yeah, I'm getting very similar emails, Rosie. I mean, I wish I could sort of turn my computer around and show you, because there's now pages and pages of people writing. From the north, I've heard from like high schoolers. Again, I'm going back and forth with 99-year-old Mary Owen, who fought for Canada in the Second World War as decoding Russian codes for the British and Canadian, and who said, I fought for Canada once, I'll do it again. I'm getting people feeling this sort of attack on sovereignty, and I don't think that's hyperbole. I don't think they're wrong. Donald Trump was very clear about, when he talked about the 51st states, what he said right out of the gate to Justin Trudeau. Everybody thought it was a joke at first, but he was very clear when asked if it would be by force, and he said no, economic force. I think that was the word he used. This is that. Listening to Lena Payne talk about critical minerals, absolutely, Canada has a lot of what the United States would like. The last 90 years of a relationship between Canada and the United States may not look anything like the next 90 years. And this may become a moment where Canadians have to come to terms with that, and also come to terms with the geopolitical rally that has not been kind to Canada. If you go back to like 2018, when Canada got into a fight with Saudi Arabia. I don't know if you remember this. There was an arrest, and Chrystia Freeland and from that department, from the Foreign Ministry, spoke out to say that the civil rights activists should not have been arrested. Well, boom, Saudi Arabia was furious, threw out Canada's ambassador, and what did the rest of the world do? It was a little bit of like, Canada's in trouble. Don't look at them. Canada was alone. With the two Michaels, Canada was kind of alone with the two Michaels as well. Fantastic diplomats from around the world who said the right thing, and I know, behind the scenes, they worked very hard. But fundamentally, Canada felt alone. Canada might be absolutely alone in this moment. Getting lots of questions. What about a relationship with the UK again? How did Denmark tell Donald Trump to go away? Is there anything that can happen with the EU? These are excellent things, as I understand it, for Canada to explore. But if there is an expectation that the rest of the world will come to Canada's defense, that might not be based on reality. I was at a security conference a few years ago where they were looking at the future of Taiwan. And one of the examples used was that if China wanted to send a signal to the rest of the world, let's just say, hypothetically, an accident were to happen in the Taiwan Strait and a ship would be sunk. Whose ship would most likely be sunk? And at the table, the conclusion from these security analysts around the world is it would probably be Canada's ship. Why would it be Canada's ship? Well, because no one would come to Canada's defense, but it would certainly send a message to the rest of the world. Uh-oh, don't do that. Don't interfere, because the same thing will happen to you. So it may just be that politically, geopolitically, what is happening here is that if this is how we're going to treat our best friend, look out, because we will come for the rest of you. So this rhetoric, when this pen goes to paper, presuming it will at any moment now, this will send a message as much to Canada as it will to the rest of the world, that Donald Trump is not messing around, and he may indeed want this country by economic means, and it will be up to Canada to figure out a way to make sure that does not happen.
Okay. Adrienne, thank you for that. Appreciate it. We'll come back to you, of course. We are standing by to get more information, of course, from the White House, from the president, about what, in fact, is on the table, how this is going to work, and what legal instrument he is going to use to put this in place. As Adrienne was talking about there, this will upend, obviously, our relationship with the United States. And other countries have also been warned by the president, including the European Union, who he suggested yesterday for the first time may also have tariffs. Canada does have other trade relationships with dozens of Pacific nations and indeed the European Union, but of course the biggest one is with the country to our south, to the United States of America. We've reached Corinne Pullman. She's the Executive Vice President of Advocacy for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Nice to see you. Thanks for jumping on, Corinne.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What are you thinking about the fact that this is now happening? It's real, and it's going to.
This is happening now.
Well,
today is February
it's
1st,
really a big shame that it's come to
2025.
this. There's a lot of, I think, anxiety in the small business community as we speak. And of course, we were thinking that hopefully that all this delay and this tactics was maybe just a bit of a ruse, but unfortunately that doesn't seem to be the case. I guess the little slight thing that's good is now you kind of know what you have to deal with, and hopefully businesses can start to figure out ways to respond. Again, though, we don't know how long it's going to be. We don't know what the Canadian reaction is going to be yet. So those are still some of the unknowns.
I would imagine that for independent businesses, and we should point out that small and medium-sized businesses across this country really fuel are the engine of the Canadian economy, that this is particularly concerning because you don't have anyone else to rely on. And so the idea that you would have to feel the effect of a 25% tariff would be potentially devastating for some of your members.
Absolutely. Many are very worried. We've been obviously hearing from them for a few weeks already, thinking, what can I do? Trying to come up with contingency plans. If you're an exporter, of course, you're thinking about, well, are there other markets that I can move to or go to, or am I actually going to have to relocate my business to the United States in order to survive? And unfortunately, if that would happen, then many jobs could be lost. If you're an importer, which is when the Canadian retaliatory tariffs, we don't know what those are going to look like yet, come into place, then that's going to obviously drive up your prices. You're going to have to think about, well, what does that mean for customer demand? So it is a bit of a scary time at the moment, and a lot of these small businesses don't have great profit margins. So 25% is extensive and substantial, and will have an impact.
How many of your members are thinking about moving to the United States? I suppose the other solution would be to lay people off if they have employees. What kind of things are you hearing on that front?
So again, anecdotal at the moment. We hope to be out in the next week or so with a bit of a broader survey to get a better sense of that. But certainly, when we're hearing from business owners, it's because they are doing, 60, 70, 80% of their business in the United States. And so that's where you sort of get stuck a little bit and you have to kind of make some big decisions. Obviously we would encourage them to look at other markets, think about what other opportunities that there might be, but you also have to understand that these are people's livelihoods and they have to sort of think about what's going to be best for their business and for their families.
What would you be hoping for in terms of government supports? Because certainly we've heard about sectoral, regional supports, a little bit different when you're dealing with independent business. Would it just be some sort of broad-based relief for entrepreneurs? What would you be hoping to see from the government?
Well, I think again, not sure at this point in time. It really will depend on what it is that people actually need. I don't think we need to have what we had during the pandemic, for example, but I do think that we have to make sure that any type of relief that is going to be made available is also easily accessible by smaller companies. There is a bit of a concern on our part that some of these may go to some of the bigger firms who obviously are going to get hit pretty hard as well. And sometimes it's not always as easily accessible by smaller companies. So making sure that those that are being directly hit and many of whom are being indirectly hit are also being considered.
Okay, Corinne Pullman, I will leave it there. Thank you for making time on your Saturday for this important moment for the country and for many of the people that you speak to. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back to David Cochrane for a little bit if I can. I'm going to try and have a commercial break in 3.5 minutes, David, so just giving you that little warning. Okay. We've heard enough now from a number of different representatives of industries and sectors about what they are worried about, and it does sound as though this is not something that's going to have an effect in a few weeks. This is immediate, and it's going to be very damaging.
Yeah, it's immediate and getting worse over time. That's the really bad thing about it, because certain acutely vulnerable businesses and sectors are going to get hammered right away, and including, as Flavio Volpe said, the auto manufacturing sector, which he thinks will go into a full continental shutdown within a week of these tariffs coming into force. So, all of this, if the president's word is to be believed, is over fentanyl coming from Canada into the United States. Now, I know there's more going in than it gets seized at the border. Only 1% of the seized fentanyl is coming from Canada into the United States, about 19 kilograms, 43 pounds, according to the latest U.S. numbers. It is the United States' legal responsibility to protect its border. Yes, Canada looks after crime and trafficking and illegal movement of goods inside its own territory, but the United States defends the United States border. Right now, essentially what the Prime Minister and his government are being asked to do by the President is to defend it for them, to apply an extra level of security at the Canada-U.S. northern border, using Canadian resources and Canadian police and Canadian border agents and drones and helicopters and dogs and whatever to stop things from going in. So it's a remarkable demand and a remarkable price that is being exacted upon Canada with these tariffs. As Lana Payne said, the head of Unifor, she's saying that Trump has declared economic war on this country. He is effectively obliterating the notion of free trade with his allies. A fellow NATO member and a G7 ally being punished this way over a health crisis that is bad in this country as well. It is not as though this is a made-in-Canada problem that is being exported to the United States. Yes, there are super labs and things that have been busted and broken up here in Canada where fentanyl is being made or put into drugs in large numbers, but a lot of these things go to the Pacific countries and as well as into the United States. It is a conundrum to imagine that a problem of enormous health consequences, but the supply problem being so small coming from Canada, would lead to a response so large, so damaging economically, and just in the long-term relationship between the countries and just the citizens of the two countries. It's a baffling situation to be in, Rosie.
David, thank you for that. We will, of course, come back to you. Just to remind people, we now know that the 25% universal tariff on Canadian goods to the United States will go into effect as of Tuesday, and that the president has said if Canada retaliates, he will escalate and increase the tariffs on his end. We are waiting to hear from the Prime Minister of Canada and members of his cabinet about what that retaliation will look like. He is meeting with premiers in just a few moments' time, and we'll undoubtedly hear from members of the province as well about what they are doing and thinking at this critical moment for Canada and our economy. We're going to take a short break here. We'll be right back after the top of the clock.
So the tariffs are coming in effect this Tuesday. So what are we gonna do? Justin Trudeau will announce some kind of retaliation in the afternoon tomorrow, this afternoon. So we'll have to wait for that. So, and it's a commercial break right now. We're just gonna do get an update for about an hour, and then we'll have to move on, because this is very important for Canadian workers and economy. A lot of businesses are maybe thinking of going down south. I know Canfor here in BC, they're the biggest employer for the mills, paper mills, sawmills. They're announcing to move down in the USA, and I heard they're starting to lay off a lot of their engineers, workers. So it's a bad chain reaction from all the businesses, and that's why carbon tax has to be eliminated, because a lot of businesses doesn't want that extra tax, right? They're the ones who produce the jobs in Canada. So in the USA, there's no carbon tax, so they'd rather put their businesses in there, and it's cheaper for them to run their business down south than in here because of the liberals carbon tax. Yeah, so I heard Mark Carney is trying to modify it, but there's not gonna be rebate. The consumers not gonna have a carbon tax for fueling their cars, but they won't have any incentives, right? Sa mga electric vehicle compared.
Hello there, I'm Rosemary
Okay,
Martin
here it
in
is.
Ottawa. You're watching a CBC News special coverage. Canada standing on the brink now of a trade war with our closest ally and trading partner. A government source has confirmed to CBC News that Donald Trump will make good on his threat to impose a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods beginning this Tuesday, potentially sending the cost of living on this side of the border and in the United States soaring. We are also expecting that energy, oil and gas, and potentially other sources of energy will be taxed or tariffed at a slightly lower rate of 10%. The president has apparently also warned Canada that if it decides to retaliate with counter tariffs, he will escalate and consider increasing the 25% tariffs to a higher level. So that is some of the things that we know at this hour. We are waiting for the details, the document that the president has signed off on to spell out more of what to expect and why the president is doing this, or the legal justification that he has given. At any rate, we are also at this hour standing by to bring you information from the first ministers who are meeting virtually at this hour to discuss between provinces and the federal government what the response should look like in terms of those counter tariffs and whether additional things need to be done, other things that aren't tariffs, for instance. We're also hoping to get some clarity around what kind of supports the federal government could offer Canadians and sectors who will be immediately impacted by this tariff going into place on Tuesday. And we are finally hoping to hear from the Prime Minister and some of his ministers in the next couple of hours about these measures and what they plan to do to respond to it. I will bring in right away the host of Power and Politics, David Cochrane, who's joining me now. He broke much of this news that I just read out there through the past couple of hours. Wondering, David, if you've heard anything more about how that's going to unfold, about what kinds of things Ottawa is considering, about how quickly they will act. I mean, certainly in the conversations I've had previous to now, we would put counter tariffs in place as soon as the tariffs are in place on us. So everything would start to unfold as of Tuesday.
Yeah, the position has always been by the government that they wouldn't say specifically what they would do until they got a clear sense of exactly what Donald Trump was going to do. And the twist we got today was a threat that if you do retaliate, according to what sources are telling us, that Donald Trump would escalate, that the 25% tariff on everything, the 10% tariff on oil and gas, presumably as well, would start to rise. So this is an escalation in the rhetoric, an escalation in the threat, and basically an I dare you to the government of Canada and the Prime Minister and his cabinet as he meets now with Canada's premiers. They were informed today, I'm told, the provincial governments and provincial sources, that the government of Canada did in fact get the official notice that tariffs are coming and would be in place on Tuesday, and it all aligns with what we have heard from our sources: the 25% tax on everything, the 10% tariff on oil and gas. The stated reason, of course, being fentanyl imports into the United States. Only 1% of fentanyl seized going into the United States from Canada and Mexico comes from Canada. 99% comes from Mexico. Now, the volumes are obviously higher than what is seized. Something gets through, but proportionally, the problem is more at the southern border than it is at the northern border for the Americans, yet the tariff is proportional in each direction. How Canada responds is going to be very difficult. This is a G7 country with a G7 economy. But, you know, the United States is the G1 economy. It is the biggest economy in the world, and you cannot win a trade war with the Americans, and that is what Donald Trump is counting on. So while he hammers everything with these tariffs, the Canadian approach, as of last word, would be to be more targeted and more specific and more calibrated. An initial hit of tariffs on about $37 to $40 billion worth of goods, targeting things such as Florida orange juice, because Donald Trump, of course, is now a resident of Florida, even though he has been associated with New York for the bulk of his life, and other, you know, sectors that hit key battleground states that are important to Donald Trump politically, and of course looking ahead to the midterm elections in the U.S. In about 18 months to 2 years from now. Then there would be a larger list of sectors and industries that they would be willing to target, bringing the total hit list up to about $150 billion worth of value. They're not going to go universal and dollar for dollar because they think the blowback damage on the economy would be too severe. They're not going to do everything right away, is my understanding, though this could change depending on how the thought process goes today, because they are worried about unintended consequences throughout the economy, that the hit from whatever Donald Trump is going to do is going to be severe enough and going to be difficult enough that you don't want to respond in a show of strength without fully knowing the consequences of the actions you may take, that you don't want businesses and sectors and industries pushed to the brink, and then it's the Canadian response that pushes them over the brink, and you compound the economic misery here. So while they support the principle of dollar for dollar, the Canadian economy cannot go dollar for dollar with the United States. Now, I know others have suggested that this should happen, notably Chrystia Freeland, for example, who is the former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, who's running for the leadership of the Liberal Party now after resigning from cabinet. She also has suggested they should immediately put a massive tariff on Tesla, for example, to hit Donald Trump's good friend and political supporter, Elon Musk, with some economic pain as he cheerleads on his social media platforms these actions by the U.S. president. But that was the thinking before we got word today, Rosie, that the escalator clause is in there, that if you hit back, we hit harder. The Prime Minister is meeting, if it's got started on time, with the First Ministers right now. The Prime Minister and the Premier are meeting, and the Premiers are meeting. Presumably Dominic LeBlanc and maybe other ministers are in that conversation as well. But we're still waiting for the official notice from the U.S. government. The initial suggestion was mid-afternoon, 2 o'clock, maybe then 2:30. American media is hearing some things that they are conveying to people in the government that suggest that this may go later. It is still unclear when the actual official written notification goes public and legally triggers all of this will happen. We do know that Dominic LeBlanc spoke with Howard Lutnick, the Trump pick for the Commerce Secretary post, the person who will be in charge of tariffs, by phone earlier today. And perhaps this is where some of the information that is spiraling out through different avenues was conveyed directly to the Canadian government by the top economic person in the Trump administration. And the initial plan, based on that timing, was that we'd hear from the government of Canada, from the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, at some point today, targeting penciled in, like everything in the Trump world has to be done in pencil, at 6 p.m. But right now, we don't have updated clarity on that because they are still waiting to see in writing what they have been told verbally by the U.S. government, that free trade, as we have known it for the past several decades in this country, is going to come to an abrupt halt on Tuesday when these 25% across-the-board tariffs are implemented and 10% on the oil sector.
Let's talk a little bit, David, before I go to my next guest, who will talk about this as well, but about the impact on the economy and then what Canadians can expect. And let's do that for both the tariffs themselves from the United States and then the counter tariffs, where there could be a real immediate impact there for Canadians as well, in terms of what it would mean at the grocery store, what it could mean for people's jobs.
Well, look, anything that crosses the border back and forth is going to get more expensive and more difficult to pay for. And also the economic depression that comes from this, because, you know, most economists say that if they do this 25% tariff and Canada hits back in any kind of proportion, the country is going to be plunged into recession. That makes it puts jobs on the line and it puts business activity on the line. Yep. The big picture, you know, analysis that we've seen from people like Trevor Tombe and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Trevor Tombe, of course, being an economics professor at the University of Calgary, is about 2.4 million jobs are directly and indirectly affected by this or exposed by this. You could see unemployment getting up to about 10% is one conversation I had with the TD Bank earlier this week. And you can see economic contraction in the neighborhood of about 2 percentage points. So the sort of economic hit we haven't seen since the global financial crisis of about 2008. But it is a full-blown recession. Yeah. We've been talking about the possibility of that, you know, coming out of COVID and through the inflation crisis, but always sort of avoided it, and we're headed towards a soft landing. Well, Donald Trump is putting us on a course for a crash landing if he follows through on this. So, you know, the data analysis is severe, but the specific analysis is even kind of more alarming in a way. And I go back to the conversation you had with Flavio Volpe from the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association earlier, Rosie, when he said if this tariff comes in, within a week, the North American auto sector will just shut down. It will stop producing cars. It will stop making cars because this is too much cost and too much uncertainty to bear. And it's just cheaper to shut down than it is to keep making cars at a loss, because consumers won't be able to buy it at the price that you would have to charge. And it just destroys the entire economic model of one of North America's most important industries.
Okay, David, thank you for that perspective. I really appreciate it. David Cochrane, host of Power and Politics. He's helping with the coverage here, co-hosting essentially through the afternoon as we wait for more details from the White House, from the United States, on something that we had expected at around 2 p.m. Eastern. We're now 2 hours from then, but as we know, things are highly unpredictable within this White House. And the president has spent most of the day at Mar-a-Lago at his golf course, and then, as Katie Simpson told us earlier, he's on his way to another golf course now. So this action has been taken. He has signed off on it. It's really a matter of when it gets posted so that we can give you more details about what it says, how it is being explained, and the legal mechanism that he is using to do this dramatic, potentially devastating move for this country, and I think it's fair to say for the relationship between this country and the United States, a free trade agreement that has been in place since the 80s and has expanded and developed and gotten more complex, but that most people believed was beneficial for both sides, for all three nations on this continent. I'm going to bring in Goldie Hyder now. He is the president and CEO of the Business Council of Canada and joins us from Ottawa. Goldie, thank you for jumping on. Tell me what you're thinking, where your head is at, knowing that this is happening and that it's happening as of Tuesday.
Well, it feels as if the president is playing chicken with the economy of North America. But, you know, it's not a game for Rosie. It's not a game for those consumers in America. They're going to be hit with these tariffs and having to pay more at a time in which they were promised better affordability. They're actually going to be punished with what amounts to a tax. It is let's call it a consumption tax for Americans of 25%. The unfortunate part of this, of course, is workers will also suffer. I agree with everything David just said about what the possibilities could be in terms of various sectors and the impacts that could have on jobs, not just in the United States, but also here in Canada. They clearly have an economy that's doing much better than ours. The president may be feeling that he can ride this out for a period of time. We're much more vulnerable. I mean, the job losses here could be quite serious, and you know, we're not in a financial and fiscal position to be able to be responding and doing this for the long haul. So we're going to need to figure out in a very disciplined and responsible way what is the most effective way to respond. How is it that we can avoid getting into a long, drawn-out tariff war, which, as David rightly notes, when you're a G7 economy, really a G10 economy, and you're
okay, I think I'm going to end this streaming right now.